to SB226FN, and I'm going to take the place of the prime sponsor. Would you like to do it? Welcome. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chairman Avard, members of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. For the record, my name is Jonah Orion Wheeler. I represent the towns of Peterborough and Sharon, Hillsborough's 33rd District. I was going to call you Representative McConkey, but Senator McConkey, it's good to see you on this other side of the desk here. But now you're an enemy, though. Now you're an enemy, so we got to watch out. Chairman Avard, I'm here today to introduce Senate Bill 226. Senate Bill 226, I'm a co-sponsor of this legislation to suspend applications for the new landfills in our state and establish a committee for the feasibility of solid waste incineration. Now, I have my own opinions about solid waste incineration, and I'm not sure it's as clean as people say it is, but I think we need to find some way to deal with the trash that's in our landfills, and I think the solid waste incineration might be a good way to move forward here. I'm not the drafter of this legislation. I'm just got my name on it, and I'm sure Senator Rockford will be here soon. And as I said that, he all right on cue. I'm sure he could answer the questions that you may have to this legislation more, but I'm here to say that the people in the North Country do not want to see a landfill on their pristine environment. They want to protect their water, their air, their land so that they can grow, they can live, they can breathe freely as people in the state of New Hampshire. And I think this legislation puts us in a good position to which we can suspend applications for any new landfills and look at the situation that we have before us as a state to potentially move forward with some new way of incineration of solid waste. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I have nothing else to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for stepping up forward. I don't think we even need Senator Rochford to come in. But we did discuss incineration in one of our studies, and I thought, well, that would have been a really good, because it reduces the tonnage by 2/3, and you can also create energy out of it.
Yeah.
And we spent millions of dollars on the scrubber for the boat plant, and that would really reduce. But rather than garbage going into the ground and leaching in, whatever, it was one of the things that we had considered, and that was one of my primary thoughts about. But so we're kind of on the same page. But thank you for stepping up.
Thank you, Senator Avard.
Now we'll give Senator Rochford an opportunity.
Good. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Senator Rochford, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is David Rochford. I represent Senate District 1, which encompasses the top 2,500 square miles of the state of New Hampshire. And I was on time. I have 3 key cards to get in the back door, and I didn't have the right one.
Oh, you didn't have your fob. Oh, my God.
I'm out there, people are waving at me, thinking I'm friendly. I'm really just trying to get some help getting in. I want to thank my Representative Wheeler for stepping up. I appreciate that. But I think someone just came to one of my committees and said it feels like Groundhog Day. So, to take a line from a revered colleague, that's really what it speaks to this. But it really isn't Groundhog Day, because Groundhog Day, if you look at the movie, it was the same thing that happened over and over and over again. And although this bill is familiar to many of the committee members here, the problem is the state of trash and landfills and permitting. That is evolving, and it's changing. And Bill Murray would get up, and the same people he'd see in the lobby of the inn that he stayed at. This is a little different. We've talked about this for a number of years, in that we need to have a brake pump, because there are a number of issues that have been changing and continue to change as we go along. one of the issues we talked about is rules, and I think want to commend DES for bringing those to us. However, there's some questions in the rules I think that have been raised at various stages of that. The other thing that hasn't changed, or that's changed, is we now have a governor who just last week said we need to put the brakes on permitting new landfills because of the questions that have been raised by the community and a number of folks that have worked down here on various issues. So that's another issue that I think would warrant this bill at this point. The other thing that this bill contains, which I know you just mentioned as I was stepping in, is the topic of incineration. And I don't have an opinion on that either way, but I think a year and a half ago we sat in a study committee and it was brought up, and it wasn't the point of the study committee, but people brought up this topic, and it certainly piqued the interest of many people on that committee. And I think it's time that we look at that, whether it's an option, a viable option, not an option. I wanted to make sure that we put that in legislation and really take a hard look at that. Some folks say it's better to put trash or pollution in the air. Other people say it's not. Some folks say that incineration is a out of date way to eliminate trash. Others say that the technology has risen to the point where it's clean and safe. I don't know the answer to that, but I think with something, with our ability to sit down, we can bring in the experts and answer that question. But I really think this is the time. It's time to do it. It's time to do it now. This gives us 6 years. If you look at the capacity of our landfills in the state of New Hampshire, we have capacity. We're not going to see trash piling up on the streets if we do this. And I think this is just a common, moderate approach to this topic. So with that, I'm going to leave you, and I'm going to go find my other key card before I come back for 10:20.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you,
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. I think it's Jared or Gerald Sullivan, representative. I misread your name. Is it
Jared.
Jared?
At the jewelry store. Sadly, my parents did not start my name.
Welcome, Jared.
All right, yeah, thank you for having me up here. I'm just here to, excuse me, I'm here to speak in favor of this bill. I think a moratorium is a great idea. I think the rules that we have currently.
I'm sorry? I thought he did.
My name is Jared Sullivan, and I'm the state rep for Bethlehem and Franconia, which is Grafton too.
I apologize, Senator.
Yeah. So sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm in support of this. I believe that our current regulations around siting of landfills are sort of antiquated, and this will give us some time to, flesh things out and get the rules that are needed in place so that we can have thoughtful regulations around how we site landfills and the way they need to be designed, all that sort of stuff. So I'm in support of the idea, but I wanted to draw your attention to one thing. This, Senator Rochefort just sort of said it's like Groundhog Day. This is like Groundhog Day because a similar bill I spoke on last year, and it was for the same complaint. So I'm an economist, and I started looking at this analysis in the fiscal note. And the last paragraph of it essentially is suggesting that if we pass this bill, there's going to be an increase in cost to the state of New Hampshire and county governments and municipal governments. I think that this is a very misleading paragraph because this is going to happen regardless of whether we pass this bill. There's going to be a delay in even if we were to approve a new landfill to be built, the only one that I guess could theoretically on any sort of reasonable timeline be built quickly would be up in Forest Lake. And let's just say for the sake of argument that were to happen quickly, it still wouldn't open up in time to make up for the closure of the landfill in Bethlehem, which is expected to close next year, potentially fiscal year 2027. So The idea that this bill is going to cause an increase, if we pass this bill, we're going to have some sort of increased cost for state and municipal governments is very misleading. And I just wanted to bring that up, point that out to the committee. They're essentially using economic logic of we're decreasing the supply and demand is at best going to be held constant. And so therefore you would expect there to be an increase in the costs. Well, that's going to happen no matter what, because if the landfill in Bethlehem closes, which it's going to do, then we're going to have the shortage that they are worried about. And it's not clear that there would be a shortage. There's plenty of capacity in the state. But using their logic, that would happen regardless of the passage of this bill. And so I just think that when you're thinking about whether or not to support this bill, you shouldn't put much weight on that part of the fiscal analysis because it's just not well done, and it should, in my mind, it should be discarded. So I just wanted to kind of point that out to you guys because I know sometimes we consider these fiscal notes and we try to understand the logic of them, and I just think that this was done incorrectly with bad assumptions, and it's just not accurate for what's actually going to be causing it. So with that, I'll take any questions if you have any.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Rosenwald has a question.
Yes, thank you. I don't have a copy of a new fiscal note. Mine is dated 1/22.
It's in this.
So
It's in the ones that are up here, and I can hand it to you if you'd like.
You must
Could
have
we
connections because we don't have that.
could we please ask the LBA to distribute the new fiscal note?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah. Thank you.
So
when is that Bethlehem supposed to close?
probably 2026, but potentially early 2027.
Where's that garbage going to go?
Most likely Berlin,
Berlin
but Carberry as well.
and Carbon.
I mean, yeah, it really kind of depends, right? Like the biggest thing about trash disposal is the transportation cost is a big part of it. So I would imagine stuff being created in my neck of the woods is going to go to Berlin, and stuff that's coming from southern part of the state will go to Rochester, and things that are coming out of state maybe we'll just have to go to other states perhaps, or find homes in their own state.
Rochester receives what, 75% from out of state?
I don't know the numbers, so.
They do. Curious. So Senator Rochford did mention something about a 6-year. What was the 6 year? Is that before we need a new landfill?
And that is my understanding. Yeah, there's a long there's a long runway for us to work with getting these rules in place before we have to worry about the construction of a new landfill. And I know that this bill covers a lot of things, not just the moratorium, but also the idea that maybe we start incinerating or whatever. Like that's what the study committee would do. But I think it's important to not just double down on landfills that aren't desperately needed at this point in time, despite this fiscal note, and see what other options might help you. Maybe there's expanded recycling opportunities, maybe there's incinerations, maybe there's a better place for a landfill, maybe there's just expansion of existing landfills. I think that those are all things that need to be explored. This gives us time to do that, and so that's kind of my thinking on it. But yeah, there's a lot of capacity for the state right now, from my understanding.
I've been very curious about the incineration because we can probably make power from that, but as long as it's clean. But my biggest concern, if this does pass muster, and whether somebody already has an application or somebody intends to, this kind of legislation puts a big wet blanket on anybody who wants to do business in the state.
Any landfill operator, you mean? Yeah, I mean, there's only one application right now. It takes a long time to get these things through. So there's only one that I'm aware of, unless you can educate me on another one that's out there. The only one I'm aware of is the one in Forest Lake. So yes, that's been, we all know the drama. I don't think I need to educate you on that. So the idea that this puts a wet blanket on it, I mean, I would think that we need new rules in place, and right now we don't have that. So I think that's probably the biggest uncertainty, is that people are fighting the current rules that we have, which are, I mean, I guess you could argue they're maybe pro-business, but if they're raising valid concerns like, you know, there's only a tiny setback from water sources, and they don't even acknowledge the the porousness of soil, things like that. So if to the extent that the rules need to be modernized, then that probably is the more important part, or the bigger wet blanket, which is we are going to always have these fights because there are valid concerns in the lack of modern regulations that are, 30 or 40 years old right now. And so anybody who's looking to build a landfill anywhere in the state, even if it's a really suitable site, they're going to say, well, we're going to hold off because we're going to fight. They're going to be fighting us on everything. Whereas if we had good, solid rulemaking, or potentially legislation, however we decide to go on this, then I actually think that, all regulations aren't necessarily bad regulations. Regulations sometimes provide clarity so that businesses can actually do good, thoughtful investments. And I think we're in the mess we're in right now with respect to what's going on in Forest Lake, because it's objectively not a very good site for a lot of reasons that I'm sure you've been educated on. You don't need me to rehash those. But if you had really sound regulations, and this was simply, this is a really good spot in Forest Lake, and we think it's really good because it passes all sorts of really stringent environmental requirements, and this is simply people not wanting one in their backyard. Well, that's a different argument versus there's actually objectively concerns here about leaking into lakes and rivers. The biggest river in our state, the Connecticut River watershed, is right there. So if you're concerned about a wet blanket, then having no or deficient regulations, I think, act as a bigger wet blanket. And so I think this gives us time to address that.
Thank you very much. So the rules that JLCAR just passed, the 26 additional rules, you think they're just not?
I would have to look at those. I'll admit that I'm not an expert enough on those rules, or familiar enough with those rules to be able to speak to them right now.
Yeah. Any questions from the committee? Thank you very much. Appreciate you stepping up to the plate.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Are there any other state reps here? I don't see one. Okay. Notch? Is it Notch? Nate. Yeah. Not Nate. I apologize. I did this last time. I apologize.
Sorry, Senator. My handwriting is terrible.
It does look like Notch, though.
Yeah. It's all right. As long as you just shout, "Hey, you, BIA," I'll come up here. And Nate Grace for the BIA. We oppose this legislation. I just want to be clear. We just oppose the moratorium. We don't have an opinion on the study committee, one way or another. We agree with the question made earlier, Senator Avard, that this does put a wet blanket on companies that want to do business in the state. And I would point out, as the committee has already noted, that new landfill rules were adopted by JLCAR on December 19th of 2024. So it's not like we're working with rules from the 1970s. We're working with rules that DES drafted, went through the whole process over the last year, had a review from the legislature. So we're just a couple months into it. One thing I would like to point out here is that, this moratorium of 6 years, that would be a 6-year delay in the possibility of increasing capacity in addition to any kind of predicted shortage. So, these landfill applications are a multi-year process. If someone were to submit one now, it takes many years, as we know at this point, to go through it. I think there is a current one pending that has been going for 6 years or so. So if we're talking about a potential shortfall of capacity for disposal of 100% of New Hampshire waste in New Hampshire by 2034 or some date thereabouts, and we're looking at a capacity shortfall, and a new operator says, hey, I want to put in a new landfill and start through that process, this would be a 6-year additional delay. And so the concern we have is really the economic question here, which I think was highlighted in the fiscal note, because if you have fewer players in the market, you have less opportunity to bargain, less opportunity to dispose of this. And one thing I also want to note is that there is a limit on the amount of waste that a landfill can accept. I couldn't speak to that knowledgeably, but I see that Mr. Wimsatt is behind me, and so I would defer to him to answer questions about that. But there is a limit, and so when we're talking about, the capacity question, it's not that all New Hampshire waste is suddenly going to not be able to go to New Hampshire. It's going to be a decrease of the amount. So if it's only 90% of that waste is going into New Hampshire landfills, we're talking about 10% being transported to someplace like Ohio. Those are going to be additional costs. As we know, the transportation costs are enormous. We also can't control what regulations other states put in place, so that may add to additional costs for that disposal as well. And so that's our concern, is this is eventually going to fall upon, well, all of us and our businesses that generate waste, and we don't see a realistic path at the moment to eliminate the possibility of producing waste. Although certainly if someone comes up with one, that's something to discuss. Happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Other questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Put an E at the end of your name, just so I'm just kidding. I know that's not a problem. It's a long E. Wayne? Lost my cap. Where did I put my cap?
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Avard, members of the committee. I do feel like a bit of Groundhog Day. We've all met before. Let me start by saying I've handed around testimony, and if I was in your seat, I wouldn't want someone to sit here and read it, so I'm going to try not to do that.
Appreciate talking from your heart.
So I'm going to speak to some talking points. I guess to start with, I couldn't disagree more with what I just heard from the BIA, and maybe you wouldn't be surprised by that, but I just want to clarify that you asked a question about when we might need more capacity. And this is a subject that's kind of near and dear to our heart, because part of getting educated on this subject is understanding, well, how do we keep score, and when do we know if we need more capacity? How does that work? The fact is that right now the department's estimate is that we have sufficient capacity to at least 2034. So that's a pretty significant amount of time. And I think you may hear today, I don't know if you'll hear from the folks from that own the turnkey facility, but they have every intention of expanding their facility before 2034. So the reality around when New Hampshire will need capacity is probably decades away. There's the largest landfill in the state. I think the largest landfill in New England is that turnkey facility. And they have every intention, and they have said publicly that they will be applying for a expansion of that facility. And so the 2034 date comes from the assumption that turnkey will close its doors and shut down and go away, and we will lose all that capacity, and that isn't going to happen. So the first thing I would say is we have plenty of run room for capacity. Secondly, the comment about a wet blanket on kind of the business side, I'm a business person. I believe in business. I think the state of New Hampshire has already voted on, we're not in the landfill business. We have a solid waste plan that says we're trying to reduce our solid waste stream by 25% by 2030, which turns out to be 375,000 tons if we were able to achieve that goal. I think that goal came from the legislature, and it's been incorporated into the solid waste plan. Karen Ebell and the solid waste working group, the Department of Environmental Services is working on that. Diversion, composting, recycling, all of those things that we should be working on. We're starting to make progress, right? We've got some things going. If we're successful, that plan also says we plan to reduce by 45% by 2050. That's 675,000 tons. That's the equivalent of 2 landfills other than turnkey. I mean, it's a huge amount. I think we already recognize from the state's solid waste hierarchy, we don't want to be in the landfill business. Landfilling is the last thing that we want to do. It's the weakest, it's the poorest use of land, that it puts New Hampshire citizens, communities, and businesses at great environmental risk. So I think with that kind of high-level goal that we're trying to shoot for, it's really what policies do we need to put in place to make that happen? And I don't know about, this bill talks about 2 things, a moratorium till 2031. And there's 2 reasons for 2031. One, we have the runway. And 2, New Hampshire, like all of our other states, both in the region and probably across the country, have significant issues with with handling solid waste. It's not really an either or, incineration or landfilling. It's the scientific community keeps giving us information that says landfills create significant risk, that things like leachate that we didn't know about years ago contain heavy metals, toxins, PFAS, serious stuff that we struggle with how to handle. If everything's working perfectly, we are today trucking, in most cases, with the exception of turnkey, we are not treating it, we're pumping it, storing it, trucking it, running it through our wastewater treatment plants, which are only partially effective in removing those toxins. And we either release those toxins into the rivers in diluting them, or we capture and concentrate them and either haul them back to the landfills and bury highly concentrated PFAS into the ground, or in some cases, we've gone the route of sludge, which we've heard horror stories not only in New Hampshire but all over the place about farms being lost and health issues and people actually losing their businesses because of it. So there's a ton of issues related to solid waste. What better time for New Hampshire to pause and take a step back and saying, what could we do better? What's best practice? How do we, we're not going to stop producing trash, but there's things that we could do to help ourselves. New Hampshire, part of the issue about the rules, I give DES credit for a lot of things. They have a very difficult job. They just spent 18 months creating new rules. On the flip side of that, organizations like North Country Alliance for Balanced Change, which I'm involved in, a coalition of other people, scientists. I wouldn't sit here and tell you I'm an expert on hydrogeology, but I'm smart enough to know I don't know what I don't know. And my group has developed enough resources to hire very competent people to look at those things. And there are very significant concerns, not only about the old rules, but the new rules. And we think the most important decision to be made in a landfill's life cycle is the first decision you make, and that's where do you put one. And a lot of the concerns about the rules have to do with something called the conductivity of the soil. And New Hampshire today, even with all the improvements we've made to some of the engineering portions of a landfill, we still have an arbitrary distance to set a landfill back from a body of water. And whether that's a lake, my little lake in the North Country, a river, or the Atlantic Ocean, we have gone, after 6 years of asking for much stronger rules and regulations, we have gone from a 200-foot minimum setback to a 500-foot minimum setback. And I would argue to this committee that both of those numbers are meaningless. Unless you do scientific study of the soil and the bedrock and you understand, what we really need is time to intercept, with the greatest plans for landfills, for like any project. They're highly engineered. We've got double line systems. We've got monitoring wells, but things fail. And the only thing protecting our rivers, our lakes, and our water bodies and our drinking water is, do we have enough separation from that landfill to the water to stop them in time before those things are irreparably harmed? So this bill, we absolutely support the moratorium bill. I think it makes sense on a lot of different levels. I don't know if incineration is the answer, but it's certainly 2 steps up there. If we go waste to energy, we're moving in the right direction away from everything we know about the hierarchy of the best use of our resources. And we'll either convince ourselves with that study that it can be done cleanly, you need the right equipment and it needs to be operated well. We'll say, no, that's not the right way. What else can we be doing? But we need to do something. We can't just keep doing what we're doing and expect a different result. New Hampshire has a lot. There are so many things that are going well for New Hampshire. I know this is a difficult budget season, but relative to our neighbors and probably everywhere else in the country, we have so much to be feeling good about and to be promoting. And the growth, especially in the North Country, because I know a lot of this relates to a current application. The North Country is booming, and it also concerns me. The BIA comes up and talks to you about impact on business. The businesses that this committee should really be concerned about are the array of small businesses in the North Country that are absolutely booming. Breweries, restaurants, retail shops, tourism couldn't be at a better place right now. People used to only come here once in a while to ski. Now they mountain bike. It's year round. That only works if we have clean air, clean water, and open spaces. And for too long, we have been so worried about making the rules fit the industry's needs to open these landfills. The truth is, we may only need one new landfill in the next 100 years. What this bill allows us to do is step back and try and get it right and make a good decision for the state. And I think ultimately, if there's concern at all about, I don't know, we've seen the storms and, there could be some natural disaster that let's say our landfill gets wiped out and we lose that capacity. We have an insurance policy. This bill does not affect existing landfills, and it doesn't affect their ability to expand. And now we will never have a better time to step back and try and get this right. I don't discount the work that's been done. A lot of people working really hard on this issue, but it's complicated. And ultimately, it's a policy decision for this group. And I think what we're asking for is a proactive approach. Don't wait till it's too late and you have to make a decision. Make the decision now, buy some time, explore our options, and get this right. It's too much at risk not to do the right thing here. So I would ask you, as you think about a wet blanket over businesses, I would ask you to also think about the life-changing impact of a leak, a body of water, drinking water supplies. One only needs to look at what happened in Merrimack with the St. Gobain mess to realize people's lives can be irreparably harmed by the types of materials that are coming through these industrial operations. And we have every opportunity to try and protect the health and well-being of our citizens and our economy, which is driven by tourism. And I would ask, I think the governor has come in and has a different view and a breath of fresh air about thinking about this. I would ask us to listen to that message and listen to what the public has to say. It's not enough to come before you year after year. We can disagree on details. We can make tweaks to bills. We can make amendments. But 2025 is the time to take some action. We can't afford to keep kicking this down the road. There's too much at stake. And we know more now than we ever did about the dangers of this stuff. So it's time. I beg the committee to pass this bill. If you have concerns, if we need to make amendments, let's work on that. But now is the time to do something. We need to stop talking and take action. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Rosenwald with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming. So in section 5, the duties of the commission is limited to studying the impact incineration would have on landfill capacity. My question is, do you think that's too limited a scope? Should it also be looking at the question of energy generation and impact on public health?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you, Senator. I do think, we run all of these bills is, the risk is how complex you make them versus how impactful they will be. I believe in the bill as written, but I do think there's more things that we could consider. If we take a moratorium, there are other issues that the state is grappling with that need answers. And Senator Avard, you mentioned the turnkey facility and the amount of out-of-state waste. I think it's more, my last look at that was, I think it was somewhere in the 60s. It wasn't 75, but it's a big number and it's a lot. We don't have, today we don't have a policy from the legislature saying, what are we going to do about out-of-state waste? It is the elephant in the room. It is the biggest tax on our solid waste system.
We have a Commerce Clause, which...
We do. That shouldn't be the end of the conversation. That should be the start of the conversation. To me, that's an obstacle. Other states have figured out other ways to go. And by the way, I think Director Wimsatt is here. Today, this won't be exactly right, but almost 50% of our trash is internal and 50%, it's somewhere in the 40s to 50s, it varies year to year. When a permit is issued to an applicant, they sign up to the fact that New Hampshire trash gets priority. So if we ended up in a capacity shortfall, my understanding is that those facilities, by contract with the state, has to take New Hampshire trash. So rather than New Hampshire sending its trash to Ohio, I would argue that Massachusetts would have to send their trash to Ohio, and we would take that spot in turnkey. Director Wimsatt could give you more details on that, but I believe that to be the case. I really do believe there's other things, and there's a broader argument to be had here about policy issues beyond just incineration. Thank you for your question.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Mr. Wimsatt?
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mike Wimsatt. I serve as Director of the Waste Management Division for the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. And thank you for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 226. So the agency is not taking a position on this bill, but as we have done with a number of bills this session, we do try to, if we see observations or concerns that we have regarding a bill that we think would be important for the committee to understand and that they would want to know, we try to come before you and provide those and then answer any questions that you might have. So having said that, with respect to this bill, there's a few things that I'd like to draw to your attention. First of all, in section 1 regarding the suspension of permitting, and this is actually, if you followed at all, the House bill, and I'm got to remember the number now. There's a House bill before the E&A Committee right now from Representative Germana, which does something quite similar to this, and I have testified on that, so much of what I'm going to say is consistent with what I've said before that in the House E&A Committee. So first of all, in section 1 regarding the suspension, it provides that we can accept an application, the agency can accept an application but cannot evaluate it or act on it. And there's, I think, an unintended consequence from doing that because, as we understand it, RSA 541A29A, which is under the Administrative Procedures Act, says that if we receive an application and we don't review it and act on it within the timelines either set out in the statute in 541A or in the governing statute, then after that time expires, the permit is deemed approved without any action or review by the agency. And I don't think that's the sponsor's intention here. So as I testified before the House E&A Committee, we think there'd be a couple of ways to potentially fix that. One could be that we'd be simply told that we deny it. And then, so basically we would have acted on it. I'm not sure that would be what the legislature would want. Another thing would be to potentially add in some language, and I think Representative Germana has done this with his bill in committee, to basically say notwithstanding RSA 541A29A. So basically recognizing that provision exists, but setting it aside. And along the lines of that, in the same section, the prohibition on evaluating or processing, we believe, could cause significant delay in development of needed capacity even after the 2031 suspension date. And the reason for that is that when we receive an application, particularly for a new landfill, which does not happen very often on a new site, there's a lot of moving parts there, and it often takes many months or even a couple of years for us to go back and forth with requests for more information to make sure we actually even have a complete application. So if we were unable to do that review upon receipt, that would just sit there. We wouldn't be reviewing it. We wouldn't let the applicant know that it was incomplete. And then once the suspension period was over, we would start that process. That could take a couple of years. Then following that, even if the landfill permit went through the process and got permitted, there's usually a few years involved in construction and then getting the facility ready to accept waste and then getting approval to accept waste. So we believe that the way this is structured currently, it could result in a delay that is well beyond the 2031 suspension date. So a proposed fix for that might be, and this is what I've conveyed to the E&A Committee for Representative Germana's bill, consider allowing the agency to review and comment on the application with respect to getting it complete. So at least letting the applicant know if and when their application is complete, so that once the suspension period ran under this bill, there would essentially be a complete application or an application that was ready to be augmented with whatever changes may have occurred during that time, and then it wouldn't be quite as far behind the 8 ball, if you will, in terms of time. Moving on, in section 2 of the bill on line 11, it makes reference to facilities that are fully permitted, not being exempt from this prohibition from expansion, basically. And as we've testified in House, the term fully is a little loaded there. It's a little wonky, but when you say fully, that there's almost no landfill that's fully permitted. An expansion could have been approved, but it wouldn't be fully permitted because it hadn't gone through all the. We administer the system through a system of permits, so there are permit modifications that occur at every step along the way. So the simple fix we suggested to Representative Germana for that is to simply remove the word fully from that and just say permitted. So these would be facilities that have been permitted in the past, but not necessarily every expansion fully permitted and what have you. And then moving on to section 2, lines 14 to 16. It makes a curious reference to facilities that have a perennial water body traversing traversing the footprint. We're not sure under what circumstances that would exist or would be permitted. So we suggested to Representative Germana that it simply be removed from the language there. And with that, those are all the comments that I wanted to raise with you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Senator Avard had a question, which I will ask for him since he had to leave. He wanted to know what the typical cost of permitting a landfill, going through all the permitting processes, if you had an estimate.
I confess I don't know. I mean, I know that, for a significant landfill new permit application, the permitting fees would be on the order of around $35,000 to $50,000 paid to the state for the permit application fee. But that represents, I think, a very small portion of the total cost. The costs are really tied up in, land acquisition, legal fees, hydrogeologists and engineering for determining the suitability of the site, doing hydrogeological investigations of the site, as well as certainly the engineering requirements for designing and putting the application together. We don't pay those. Those are paid by the applicant, and we're not privy to those costs, so I don't really have a good sense for it.
Would it be reasonable to anticipate they'd be well into the millions?
I would not be surprised if that were true.
Senator Waters.
Does Senator Carson want to see it?
Yes.
Should we just recess for 2 minutes?
You want to recess? All right.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
We're going to take a 2-minute recess, and I'll be right back.
Cindy, I think what I'm concerned about, and you can talk to Jim Donchis, is that, let's say,
In 2 minutes, we are back, and Senator Waters, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few. Mike, could you outline for us what's in the governor's proposal?
I assume you're referring to the Solid Waste Siting Committee in HB2. Is that right?
Yeah, and the moratorium that she has.
Yeah, my understanding is that in essence what it would do is it would establish a solid waste facility site evaluation committee and essentially create a 2-step process for permitting a landfill or other significant solid waste facility. And what that would consist of would be all the permits that would be required by a facility such as a landfill, which would be our solid waste facility permit, typically wetlands permits, shoreline, potentially shoreline permits, alteration terrain permits, and an air permit, those existing statutory permitting processes would proceed upon receipt of the application, and they would be acted on. And then following that, if they were not approved, then presumably the facility would not go forward. If they were approved under those state statutory permitting processes, then the second phase would occur at a different body. It's not DES. It would be a solid waste facility siting evaluation committee, which, as I understand it, would consist of it would be one designee, I believe, from the commissioner of DES, but also other members. Could be there would be community members, public members, appointed by the governor, and they would sit in. They would have to go through a rulemaking process to establish rules, and that would take place over presumably a year. And there's a moratorium, essentially, as I understand it, says the agency couldn't act on any applications for a landfill during that year or until the rules are completed, whichever is later. So if it took 15 months to do the rules, the moratorium would be in place for 15 months.
So if I may, so in effect, she has proposed a 15-month moratorium.
I use 15 months as an example. I mean, the language in the bill is a 1-year moratorium.
All right, thank you. If I may, yeah. So I know, the main thing we're concerned about is municipal solid waste. Mm-hmm. This would do something else, though, because wouldn't it also put a moratorium until 2031 on, let's say there's, someplace that wants to process soils?
This bill?
Yeah.
Or
let's say there's a kind of landfill that might want to do other kinds of processes that were not municipal solid waste. Those would also have to go through the 149H, right? 9
I want to make sure we're not conflating. I want to make sure I'm having the same conversation you are. So are we talking about this Senate Bill 226 or are we talking
226.
about? Okay, so this bill that is the subject of this hearing, my understanding as it's drafted is that any landfill would be subject to the moratorium, regardless whether it accepted municipal solid waste or soil or other solid waste.
And if I may have one more. So let's say a municipality wanted to establish a municipality-owned one, as we have in Nashua and elsewhere. Mm-hmm. They also would be prevented under this until 2031.
I believe that's true. I don't believe the bill makes any distinctions between municipally owned or privately owned landfills.
Further questions?
Okay, that's it for now. Thank
Senator
you.
Roosevelt?
Thank you. So if a municipality wanted to expand its landfill but not build a new one, that would not be prohibited under this bill?
That is my understanding. That's correct.
Further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you.
If I may, I just wanted to, going back to my previous, I made reference to Representative Germana's bill a number of times, and I checked during the break. It's House Bill 171. I couldn't remember the number at the time.
171. All right, thank you for that. Anybody else that would like to testify on Senate Bill 226?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Could Henry come up for a second? I just wanted to ask a question. If he
Henry, would you like to testify or answer questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Henry Bayou, here on behalf of Waste Management. I didn't sign up to speak, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I just think because we had some references to the Rochester facility. So just to clarify, would 226 as written interfere with any way with your expected filing in 2028 for the Rochester expansion?
I think as Director Wimsatt just indicated, it would not. Section 2, because it would be an expansion of an existing landfill, it would not affect that. There's been quite a bit talk about the capacity. So Rochester in the Turkey landfill is the largest landfill that we have here in the state. It accepts most of the waste that we have here in the state. It has permitted capacity until 2034. And the department accomplishes that by a depletion schedule. I think that's what Representative Sullivan was talking about. They can't just accept all the capacity in 1 year and have it trucked from everywhere. They have a depletion schedule so that it guarantees that the state has capacity till 2034. So that's what the permit says. They've actually been managing it really well, and it could actually extend to 2036. They might be able to get 2 more years out of it, even though it's permitted to 2034, the existing permitted site. They have an ability to expand, which could add another decade or so. In order to do that, I was talking with the folks over there the other day, they would probably need to file in 2027 or 28 because of the length of time that it takes. You can get a permit approval initially, and then you have to build the thing, and then you have to get a permit to operate. So the department obviously wants to make sure that after this thing is constructed, that it's going to work the way it's supposed to. So the amount of time that it takes, so that's why they will probably look to in 2027 or 28 file an application for an expansion. That's why Section 2 of the bill is critical, because we have this landfill that is already in existence. It has a good relationship with the community of Rochester. We have a place to put New Hampshire's trash for quite a while at that facility. And I think the language that's in Section 2 is really important. I also want to address, there's quite a bit of talk about out-of-state waste. So I just texted Steve Pudgy, who runs the place. And you can look at the records at the department. In 2024, so for calendar year 2024, it was 55% out-of-state waste. In 2023, it was 53%. So the 70%, the 60% is off mark. It's been, and this is at the department, it's been 55 and 53%.
Thank you.
Yep.
Further questions?
Yeah. So your waste management is not opposed to 226, right?
Yep.
And could you clarify a little bit about the, so you get the, you said something like if you get the expansion, you know, whether you need it in 34 or 36, you envision that that expansion would cover 10 years, but after that?
I didn't ask Steve whether they have even more property out there, but it would at least, and it would depend on what the community wanted to do too. So, I mean, they've had a real good relationship with the community. I think they want to maintain it. So,
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you, Henry. Anybody else? Just gonna ask you to make it quick. We got one more hearing to do. We've got a hard cutoff at 12 here.
A lot of things have already been spoken about here too, so I'll just provide a little bit more color. And this really doesn't, by the way, my name is Michael Wright. I'm from Littleton, New Hampshire. I'm here representing myself. But some of what I'd like to talk about has actually been presented to you on an online testimony from Dr. Adam Pinkel. And just in reference to what Waste Management was saying about capacity, because that's been a big issue here today, right? Is that New Hampshire has zero need for another landfill, let alone one sited currently up in the one that's under consideration up in Dalton, which is hydrologically one of the worst tracts in the state. As Waste Management just was talking about, and they actually did this presentation to the House E&A Committee last month, they have capacity up to 2036. And they're definitely going to file an application to expand. And what I've been giving here is that it could expand maybe roughly 20 years of capacity too. So currently in New Hampshire, we generate about 1.1 million metric tons per year. And Rochester has room for 1.4 million metric tons. Then there's 200K tons up in Carberry, which is now serving almost every community north of the Notch. And from our waste management strategies, we're supposed to be generating actually 25% less disposable trash for landfilling. So if you take this all into consideration, New Hampshire really has enough capacity for the next 30 or 40 years. It's not possible for a needless additional surplus capacity to actually add any benefit to the state at this time. Now, the big thing about landfilling is what comes out of the landfilling that really is a huge concern, which is leachate. And a new landfill in New Hampshire would not only be the magnet for Massachusetts and Connecticut trash, it will generate up to 1 billion gallons of PFAS containing leachate, which will be then shipped down to Concord or Merrimack for processing. Now, the problem with leachate is that there's currently no way to remove PFAS from the leachate on an industrial scale. The next 5 years for this pause would actually be time well spent exploring how we can develop annihilation technology in the field so that we can actually deal with a lot of this PFAS that's generated from all the trash that's coming up from south. So that's really all I wanted to say about that. I mean, I support this bill. I hope that provides a little bit more color about some of the details with this. We have enough capacity, and we should really be spending time figuring out how we're actually going to do other types of issues with the handling of our trash, such as our PFAS issue.
Thank you for your
Okay.
testimony.
Any questions?
Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. And with that, we're going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 226. Senator Rochford is here, so we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 227. Good morning and welcome again.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is David Rochford, Senator from Senate District 1, serving all of Coos County and the top third of Grafton County. I come before you today with Senate Bill 227. And I know I made some jokes about Groundhog Day, and I'm going to not make that joke again, but we've got another bill in front of us that actually the basis for this Senate Bill 227 is actually House Bill 1454, which passed both the House and the Senate 2 terms ago. Ultimately was vetoed by the governor at the time, and the veto was not overturned. But to reemphasize, it was the position at the time of the House and Senate. And what this does is obviously the department goes forward and sets rules, and they set rules based on certain parameters, be it granular, not granular, broad, specific direction of the legislature. And I know they just revised the rules that changed the setbacks for landfills from 200 feet, arbitrarily set number, to 500 feet, which arguably is another arbitrary number. And what this bill does is it provides some more specificity for the department to look at the flow of leachate. It's looking at when these things leak, when these landfills leak, how long is it going to take for that leachate, as we heard a little bit discussion in the last hearing, to get from the landfill to move across a length of distance. Now, this is important because obviously if it's moving towards a body of water or moving towards a drinking supply, that's of concern. And what 227 would do is it would provide some parameters to measure the distance over time where the leachate would flow if, God forbid, there was a leak. Now, I know I know we've got experts here around this table that could talk to you about, water flow and perk testing and as it relates to septic systems. But as I understand it, this would be essentially a reverse look at that. We don't want the stuff to flow out of the landfill area into drinking water. Again, the specific, type of material or land geology that we put these things in is quite important. Just recently, 3 weeks ago, an official from a major landfill operator in New England went on Vermont Public Radio and acknowledged the fact that, you know, these things should not be built on sand, because if stuff leaks, it's going to flow through the sand and it's going to travel quite a long distance. There are certain types of conditions in soils where they are more appropriate at siting. And what this bill does is it measures that hydrogeologic conductivity when these things leak. I know there are people here that are going to speak much more eloquently and in depth about hydrogeology and how it flows, but before I stop, I do want to remind the committee of one thing, that it was the position of the House and the Senate 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. But I also want to highlight a drafting error that came out when this came out of OLS. It is on page...
Line 23, maybe?
Page 2, line 6.
All right, I got another one.
Oh, you found another one, okay. So the page 2, line 6, hydraulic conductivity of 1 by 10 to the -6 centimeters per second.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, is that going to be a deal breaker?
Just kidding.
So that was
That
the.
was line I'm teasing. I'm teasing.
I know. Well, you missed my groundhog joke. Groundhog Day. I did it again.
You did it again.
I did it again. Yes. So I just wanted to bring that out. I know if Senator Waters found another.
I don't know. I just was going to ask you about.
Okay. And then that's the essence of the bill. You know, it really looks at how long is it going to take for when it leaks to travel a distance of time, and that's the bulk of it. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if I can. Otherwise, I know there are people back of me that are far more versed in this topic than I am.
Senator Waters for the question.
Yeah, thanks, Senator. So what I was wondering about line 23 on page 1 was that it seems to me, wouldn't you want the default to be the 500 feet that we now have in the rules?
Yes, you're right. You're
So,
right.
Yep. I figured as much.
And this was drafted before those rules made it through
So
JLCAR. Yep.
All right.
Yep. Exactly. Good catch. Thank you.
Other questions from the committee?
Nope.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you
Senator.
very much.
Take care. All right, Mr. Wimsatt, would you care to come forward? I have NP, meaning no problem. Or no position.
Yes, I did leave it up to your interpretations.
You did.
Good morning again. For the record, Mike Wimsatt, Director of the Waste Management Division for New Hampshire DES. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify on Senate Bill 227. As I indicated previously, we're also not taking a position on this bill, but again, we do, if we identify concerns or observations that we think would be of interest to the committee, we try to point them out to you and then be available for questions. So with that, I do have a few things that I wanted to note about this bill. First of all, so in section 2 of the bill, lines 9 to 14, again, it establishes a 5-year setback distance for surface waters. I would note that, as has been suggested, we did pass rules recently that do two things that are important. They set a default setback of 500 feet from surface waters, but they also provide a more performance-based setback, which is to say that a landfill and the footprint and its associated infrastructure cannot be sited in a location where a release of a contaminant from that footprint could get to a surface water before it could be detected, investigated, and remediated. So that's a protective part. That's our vision for the protectiveness of those rules.
That was just passed?
Exactly, that's correct. And so, but also want to note that on page 1, lines 15 to 19, the details about how a maximum seepage velocity is determined. Some concern, unclear if that is a macro scale evaluation or a single location measurement. The language suggests that it could be a single location measurement. And if that's the case, it could really potentially exclude nearly any site due to a relatively small area of soil that's neither contiguous in the formation nor representative of the sort of macro scale of the aquifer in the area. In other words, if you did a test pit in a limited area of very coarse soils, you could get a result that would suggest a very fast travel time that really wouldn't be representative of the site. So we think that definition, if this bill were to advance, we think that definition should be looked at carefully. The next thing I would note is that just in our review of it, it's unclear to the agency why expansions of existing facilities would be exempt from these siting criteria. If these siting criteria are deemed to be important and protective, we don't understand why residents of a community that already happens to have a facility there should, with an expansion, be subjected to less protective conditions than a new facility. So that just really posing that question. And then the next issue that I would raise would be on page 2, lines 16 to 18. Again, this goes back to that fully permitted language. If that's the intent, it'd be better to remove the word fully from that paragraph for the same reasons that I described in my prior testimony.
I'm sorry, page 2, lines 16 to 18?
Maybe I'm on the wrong page. Sorry about that.
Am I missing something? It goes up, page 2 has...
Yeah, I've got, hold on just a moment. I will correct myself here. Where'd you go? Oh, sorry about that. It's page 1, lines 29, or line 30, basically, is where the word fully appears.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. And what does that mean? Fully permitted?
Well, you're right. So the concern is that if the intent of the bill is to exempt existing facilities, but only in the event, to the extent that they're fully permitted, we would argue that there's no facilities ever fully permitted because we administer our whole regulatory program for solid waste landfills through a permit system. We're constantly modifying those permits. There's almost always an application to modify the permit in some fashion. Could be very minor, but it just, our engineers looked at that and made them a little nervous, and we just wanted to point out that if you just take out the word fully, then I think the language achieves what it's trying to achieve there without creating that ambiguity. And then, as I indicated previously as well, on page 2, lines 2 to 3, the reference to lines 1 through 3, perennial water bodies traversing a footprint. We think that could be deleted. We don't know under what circumstances that would ever exist.
So the current rules would already protect that as well, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little absurd, but to the extent a stream ran through the middle of a landfill, it would still be subject to all the monitoring requirements that
Right.
it would normally be. But
So you would request to strike that, those three lines?
we don't understand under what circumstances that would have any meaning. So we just think it would be better left unsaid. And then the next issue, I was going to point out the error but the sponsor did that on their own, so I won't mention that. The next point I would make would be that on page 2, lines 7 to 12, it describes the conduct of subsurface investigations that describe the superficial stratigraphy and bedrock, quote, at least to a depth of nearby aquifers used and potentially used to provide drinking water to residents. We think that language is problematic because, as I testified in a similar bill before the House, if you ask a hydrogeologist what an aquifer is, what they learn in the entry-level hydrogeology course is an aquifer is in the eyes of the beholder. If I'm a single homeowner and I can drill a well into any formation and get enough water from my home, that's an aquifer for me. So basically, anywhere we would site a landfill in New Hampshire would be an aquifer. Question of quality, question of what it could produce and how important it is. But to use that term, it seems to be unclear in it. These potable aquifers, so there could be a potable aquifer there. If they're located on the site, and also the language, it's a little puzzling. It says, well, to the depth of the aquifer, suggesting only to the depth where you encounter the aquifer. It seems like you'd want to evaluate the entire aquifer or the whole area of groundwater. So we're just pointing out that language is confusing to us as scientists. And then lastly, on page 2, lines 13 to 15, it makes reference to requiring that a 24-hour employee be on site. And I think that we noted this in our review of the similar House bill. We didn't make note of it before the committee, but the industry did make note of this, saying that they didn't feel that was a good use of resources. They felt that a better use of resources would be to advance or augment electronic monitoring systems that were capable of notifying personnel off-site. And we had the same observation, because if you could pay a security guard to be there 24/7, but that doesn't guarantee he's going to notice that something is overflowing. A landfill site is a big site, and unless they really have the electronic monitoring systems to identify some kind of an overflow or a failed pipe, a failed valve, or a failed switch, your electronic monitoring systems are going to be a lot more effective at determining that than just someone working on the site 24/7. And so we would agree that if we're going to ask a permittee to put resources towards ensuring that the facility is safe 24/7, just having someone there on the site is probably not the most effective way to do that.
Chairman, I know there's a new fiscal note on this. Could you get the copies for us? This is Kevin Avard too.
Is there other questions? Are you done?
That's all I have. Yes.
All right. Follow up.
So, thank you, Mike.
Hey, hit your mic, please.
Sure can. So, would it be correct then to say on the existing sites that an expansion would simply be governed by the 500-foot rule?
That's correct.
No matter what the expansion is, it's the 500 foot that would apply to them, not anything else.
That's correct. We put an augmented set of standards in for siting in the rules, and expansions of new facilities will be subject to those augmented standards.
Yeah. You know, I'm just trying to think about imagining if this were enacted, and given the nature of New Hampshire, whether you really could you really find a site anywhere in the state, given the water we have, that could qualify under this?
That's not clear to us. The analogous bill in the House also set a 3,000 foot setback, or the 5-year travel time, whichever is greater. And the chair of the House E&A Committee asked me to create a map that would describe those areas. And I said, well, the 5-year setback is just, it's too granular, it's too specific to the site. We don't know how to map that. But we can map 3,000 feet around surface water bodies. And we did that. And what that created was a map that essentially eliminated most of southern New Hampshire, from probably the southern part of the Lakes region on down, from being considered for a landfill because of the, once you drew all the radii, it all got dark. And left significant portions of the total percentage was I believe it left on the order of, I can't remember if I get these reversed to it. I think it was 46% of the state remained for potentially siting a landfill. But if you looked at the map, you knew that, and understand that's just that 3,000 foot, that's no other siting criteria. If you looked at the map, you would also recognize that much of the North Country was the White Mountain National Forest, where we know that soils are thin and bedrock is exposed, and aside from politically being, or legally being able to site a landfill there, it's also not a good siting location. So it eliminated much of the state, just that 3,000 feet. This bill does not suggest that. This suggests only the 5-year travel time, which of course is very difficult for us to map. We have expressed concern previously in previous bills that we don't know how much of the state that would eliminate. We believe that the language in our rules is quite protective because it allows us, looking at individual sites when they come to us for an application, to make a determination about two important things. So forget the number of feet setback. The performance standards are, you can't site a landfill where a release of a contaminant from the footprint would contaminate, could get to essentially contaminate groundwater at the property line without first being detected and having an opportunity to remediate it, and couldn't contaminate an off-site surface water with, as I testified previously, unless you could detect it, investigate it, and remediate it before it reaches the surface water. So while those are, there's some subjectivity on the part of or they're objective, but they're on the part of the hydrogeologists and the engineers reviewing the application to make a determination about that. But it's based on the site, and that's what we think it should be, because then what we're really doing is saying, we don't want these resources to get impacted. We want to be able to look at an individual proposal and determine that it's not going to impact those resources in a way that wouldn't allow us to remedy it before the impact happens.
I have a question regarding Bethlehem and the new rules. Could Bethlehem be expanded if so choose, based on the new rules?
I have not evaluated that site with respect to the rules, but I'm not aware of a specific condition that would prevent it. But again, we've not evaluated that. We don't. My understanding is that the Bethlehem site is expected to close in 2026, perhaps a little bit later. And the reason for that is not that it was denied a permit from DES, but because the zoning, the local zoning, does not allow expansion beyond the footprint that they already occupy.
Senator Rosenwald, did you have a question?
I was looking for the new fiscal
Oh. Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Director. You just inspired a thought. So we heard Mr. Value testify earlier about the expansion ability at the site in Rochester. Would it be possible for the community of Rochester to pass a zoning regulation that between now and when they were going to expand that would not allow them to do that?
I can't comment. I'm not qualified to say whether they could legally do that or not. I know that when a community attempts to eliminate a facility by zoning, that can be considered spot zoning, and that can get them into some legal trouble. But certainly the courts have held, as I understand it, my layman's understanding of it, is that solid waste facility regulation is primarily given to the state to do. We have primacy with respect to that. And that local communities can't enact very much that would sort of cross into the state's regulatory authority. However, the courts have specifically held that through duly enacted and properly enacted zoning, a community can decide where in their community they want to allow a landfill to exist. And that's what has happened. That zoning has been in place, as I understand, in Bethlehem for many, many years. And the permittee there has been operating under that understanding for several years.
Thank you for clarifying it.
Senator Rosenwald.
Yeah. Do you have an estimate on this remote monitoring that you mentioned? That would be a one-time cost.
On the cost? I don't know what the costs are, because again, those are borne by the permittee. I will tell you that we did augment our remote monitoring requirements in this most recent rulemaking that we did to ensure that particularly leachate management systems are properly monitored, so that if there is a malfunction that occurs during off hours when the facility is not manned, that there will be alarms that would actually, automatic dialers, which would actually dial designated personnel every 10 minutes until they answer, until they respond.
Thank you. So that would knock out this $100,000 to $500,000 annual cost in the fiscal note.
Oh, in the fiscal note.
Because you wouldn't need all these positions. You wouldn't need staff sitting at the
I don't
24
believe
hours a
that.
day.
I don't believe that the costs that we're identifying there are state costs. They are largely county and local costs, and they're, again, I admit, when we do a fiscal note, we're shooting in the dark. It's really hard for us to do these things. We do the very best we can. But our understanding was that if a county or a municipality chose to operate a landfill, we don't have any county landfills right now, but we have several municipally owned and operated landfills, Nashua, Lower Mountain, Washington Valley, and Lebanon, that they would need to comply like anybody else. And those were the estimated potential range of costs that they might incur. And that's for, complying with the rule in its entirety, not just the remote monitoring or the requirement to have someone there 24/7.
Further questions? Follow up?
Yes, thank you. So those costs, or at least part of them, are already going to be assessed on the localities based on the department's new rules. It's not because of Section 19.
To the extent that they need to make improvements to their automated systems under the new rules, that's correct. They would incur additional costs. That's correct. This was making an estimate of the other requirements and the requirements to potentially have a person on site 24/7.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for your testimony and your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Henry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Henry Vayu, here on behalf of Waste Management. We've got issues with a number of sections in the bill. Director Wimsatt highlighted a few already. On page 1, line 19 of the bill, where it talks about the maximum seepage velocity shall be the highest rate measured for any test site in the disposal area. So that's basically trying to determine the seepage velocity. And at Turkey Landfill, which is a good site, you'll drill down, it's good. Over here, 12 feet away, good. 15 feet over there, good. 30 feet over there, it doesn't pass. And what this says is that one test site is going to be the maximum seepage velocity. And so it makes more sense to do more of an average. I'm looking at Senator McConkey. He knows soils, he knows seepage velocity. So again, it'd be more representative to do an average to get a good idea of what that location is like. And then the next section, let's see, section 7, which on page 2, that starting on line 4, the undisturbed area underneath the landfill and looking at the seepage velocity there. Again, at the Turkey landfill, which is a good site, to say you're just going to base it upon the undisturbed soil, you can actually engineer something better, bringing in other material. And so that should be taken into consideration when applying, that if you can take out the underneath and put in something engineered that's better, that should be taken into consideration. And then Director Wimsatt talked about the confusing language on aquifers, which we think that should have another look at there. Otherwise, any site in the state could be eliminated. And then again, the employee on guard 24/7. Turkey has sensors all over the place. The leachate they treat on site. They have an on-site a water treatment facility before that goes to the City of Rochester's treatment facility. And there are more sensors there that can react quicker than someone sitting there 24 hours a day. So just making sure if you want the best result, require the sensors, which we've already invested in. And that's it.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters?
Not so fast. Thanks, Henry. So, just to clarify from what we heard before, that for your expansion then, you would be governed by the current rules, and that this bill would not affect that.
Are you referring to 128?
Right, and, but the question comes up, you know, if this is creating this new system, but you would be governed by the 500 minimum and the rules, if this, in terms of any expansion you would do.
Well, it says per any proposed, so I'm looking at line 9, for any proposed new landfill. So for the existing permitted capacity that they have till 2024,
right.
I think, to your point, that would apply. To an expansion, not so sure. Maybe that language, and maybe we can talk with Director Wimsatt, but I'm not so sure because it's not an entirely new landfill, but I think it just could be clarified. An expansion, you got to get a brand new permit because the permit that they have now to operate does not apply to what they're going to be looking for an expansion. So some clarity there, Mike, to your point. I know we've had this discussion in the past.
If I may,
Yeah.
Given what it says on lines 28 and 29, that nothing is construed of expansion or modification, any landfill facilities, et cetera,
Yep.
which would be your proposed expansion.
Yep.
So when you did that proposed expansion,
Yep.
it would be governed in terms of setbacks by the existing rules now, the 500 feet, and you would not have to do any of these new requirements.
Is this on the record?
Yeah.
In the legislative history? Yeah.
So, and then, I mean, this might be an obvious question, that Waste Management isn't gonna build anything on sandy
No.
soil, right?
No.
I mean, it's just, that's not
No.
what anybody's gonna do.
Right.
Thank you.
Further questions, Senator Rosenwald?
Thank you. Now I'm a little confused because the last bill had that same nothing in this section shall prohibit expansion. And I don't think you raised any concerns about Waste Management's ability to expand its operation in that bill. So I'm confused as to why you're not sure that it wouldn't interfere with your ability to expand in this bill without more regulation.
I'll talk with the legal beagles.
Pardon?
I will talk with the legal beagles and
Okay.
I'll get back to you.
Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much, Henry. Wayne? Timothy can come up with you as well, so you know that you're on the same organization.
It's my lawyer.
Yeah.
One of our lawyers.
They're gonna kick us out at 12 o'clock, so.
I'll try and go quickly. Again, for the record, my name is Wayne Morrison, president of a grassroots organization called North Country Alliance for Balanced Change. I'm handing around my testimony. I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights. First of all, on this, I know there was conversation back and forth about this operator 24/7 versus sensors. And I just as a cautionary tale, I know of 2 instances in the last couple of years where in the state of New Hampshire at the NCS landfill, we had what I believe is the largest leachate spill in the history of the state that happened over the course of a weekend with nobody around. A pool overflowed, and all weekend long, leachate escaped the tank, and no one was there to see it. And that was a pretty significant spill. Secondly, in the state of Vermont, same company was doing experimental work on some PFAS treatment at a landfill. I think it was in Coventry. Same thing, over a weekend, spill. Equipment failed and a spill happened. So there's nothing magical about, we don't, our organization isn't getting any kickback for trying to get jobs for people to work 24/7, but failure of systems, of monitors and happen. And we've had 2 examples of significant spills that occurred when no one is around just to watch them. And I don't know if, I believe in technology, and maybe there's sensors and things that work, but they didn't work in those 2 cases. And we should be concerned that 2 significant events happened and no one was around. And when I think about billion-dollar waste companies and the risk of this stuff, how expensive is it to have a guard or somebody there? And I don't think you have to have an engineering degree to notice that the tank is overflowing. I mean, what we're looking for is safeguards, and I think that's where that came from. And I'm not trying to be light about that. I mean, we're looking for a protection, and a lot of bad stuff seems to happen when nobody's around, and that's been problematic. So that was one thing. And then Director Wimsatt mentioned that in the new rules, there's a element in the rule that says we won't contaminate water. I think that's a terrific, emotional, great rule, but I don't know where the meat is on that. And what is our position? How far back? How many years back do you have to be set back to feel like that isn't going to happen? What is the criteria? There's that commercial, where's the beef? And I think in that, saying that we won't contaminate water bodies is a great statement, but the devil is in the details, and how do we know that's really the case? And what's our position? What's our policy on what's the margin of safety that we want? And I don't know if it exists in current rules, and that's one of our concerns. So 227 to me offers, for a number of years, we've been kind of going back and forth on a distance setback and what's the best way to do that. I thought we had built consensus overall a few years ago that a site-specific, science-based setback makes the most sense, because what we're really after is it 3,000 feet, is it 200 feet, is it, whoever picks that number, we're hoping that that's enough. Where actual scientific, we have the know-how, testing the soils and the bedrock, and understanding what the velocity is of how fast is it going to move and how much of the stuff is going to move. Seems to me that is a common sense approach. We could debate for a lot of times about, is it an average, is it the highest, but moving to a science-based setback that reflects a policy from the legislature about we want to ensure that we have an ample margin of safety here, and we're going to use science to dictate that. It makes an enormous amount of sense to me, and for whatever reason, that specification has not made it into a new set of rules, and we have been promoting that. It hasn't come from a bunch of homeowners who don't know diddly about anything. We've hired competent hydrogeologists, we've hired wetlands experts, we've hired people that understand how to design and run landfills. And universally from what we see both in New Hampshire and what we see across the United States, it seems to me that best practice is having a site-specific setback distance. The details of that and working through the mechanics of that to get it right, sure, there's some debate there. But having an arbitrary 200 feet, 500 feet is wishful thinking. We don't know whether that's going to work or not. And hope is not a good policy. It's not a good strategy. We can do better than that. And therefore, Senate Bill 227 tries to address that. And there will always be debate. We are trying to move the needle from convenience and expediency and helping industry to get a site selected. We want that needle to be more balanced. yes, if we need another landfill, we cannot, I think there's a reasonable debate that say, let's say that there is not a sufficient land mass in the state of New Hampshire to build a landfill safely. Well, my view is then we don't build a landfill in New Hampshire. And maybe it's incineration, and maybe there's some other way of doing it. I don't believe that's the case. I believe we have ample place to find. We don't need 500,000 acres for a landfill. We need a few hundred acres. And, you know, I don't believe the data says that if we make our rules a little bit more stringent, we won't be able to site another landfill in the state of New Hampshire. We don't, as Director Wimsatt said, in the history of the Department of Environmental Services, we've never had a greenfield landfill come through.
I do got a question on that spill that you mentioned. Did they capture it, or did it go into some type of aquifer, or was there a catch basin to recover?
That's a really good question, Senator. I don't know if we ever heard specifically what the extent of the exposure was there. There was a investigation. There was a report.
I'm sure people would have complained if it went into the aquifers and stuff like that.
Yeah. I don't know if we have a clear picture of exactly how much damage there was. I can tell you that it seems to me as a citizen that the first reaction is always the spill never left the landfill site. It was, you know, was no problem here. I'm a doubting Thomas on that, but I don't have the evidence to say otherwise.
I'm getting running out of time, so I want to hear from Timothy, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee, and for having this hearing on a very important piece of legislation. I'm Timothy Kopczynski, an attorney with BCM Environmental and Land Law, and we've been working with North Country Alliance for Balance Change for many years. And just to build off what Wayne was saying, I think it's important to view this bill against the backdrop of RSA 149-M, which is to protect human health, preserve the natural environment, and to conserve precious and dwindling natural resources. The current solid waste rules, meaning the ones that were just readopted in December 2024, don't meet the call of this purpose statement in RSA 149-M, which is why we need legislation like this bill. And the purpose statement of the bill actually dovetails perfectly with the purpose statement of RSA 149-M. In the treatise that I passed around to all of you, and I also emailed copies to everyone on the committee just before the hearing started, you'll see a comparison that we made of the current rules that were just readopted in December 2024 with the prior version of the rules. And in that matrix, you'll see that the current version of the rules are less protective than even the prior version of the rules. So I'd encourage the members to view that matrix. The bulk of that letter is filled with peer-reviewed scientific studies which support having stricter requirements, such as the setback requirements contained in this bill.
I'm glad you're not going to be reading it to us today.
No. To be honest, I don't know if I'm qualified to read all of the words in there. So, and then the last thing that we included in that letter is another comparison matrix that shows how New Hampshire's current solid waste rules compare to its New England neighbors. And in that matrix, you'll see that New Hampshire's current rules are the least protective out of all of the New England states. And based on the recent changes in December 2024, that deficit has grown. Legislation like this bill is necessary to strengthen New Hampshire's standards and keep it from lagging behind its New England neighbors. And this bill is definitely a step in the right direction. If we maintain the status quo, landfill developers will continue to concentrate out-of-state waste in New Hampshire because it has the most relaxed standards. This bill will help New Hampshire achieve equal footing with its neighbors. And for these reasons, I, on behalf of North Country Alliance for Balance Change, would encourage you to pass Senate Bill 227.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions? Thank you very much. I have one more speaker, and then we're going to get kicked out of here, so that's why I had you both come together. But thank you for your testimony. Nate, with an E.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nate Grace for the Business and Industry Association. Again, we oppose this legislation as well. I will be brief. Just everything that Director Wimsett said that were concerns and everything Henry said were concerns are concerns of ours as well. So reasons for us to oppose the bill. I also wanted to note a couple other things here. One, this bill appears to be stricter than the bill that was considered a few years ago, House Bill 1454, that was referenced. As far as I understand it, there's no 3-year credit scheme in here for distance from landfill to water body. So whereas that bill had apparently set up a system where DES could, under certain circumstances, give operators credit, so they'd only have to have 2 years because they had some sort of monitoring system in place. That's not here. So we're talking about a strict 5 years from landfill to water body. And I think, from our perspective, we don't know of anywhere that would be available in the state to actually put a landfill if this were to go into place because of that 5-year limitation. Obviously, when you have a contamination, whether it's a leak or whatever the case may be, the properties of both the soil and the contaminant itself interact in order to kind of have that plume result in movement occur. And we know that outside activities can influence that. We've seen that in some developments in the southern part of the state where people, for instance, have applied for well permits. There's been a contaminant near but not directly under where their well is, and they have been denied those well permits because our understanding is that would draw the contaminants into currently uncontaminated wells. We've also seen in some areas of the state where we have an initial contamination plume, and that has moved differently than I think anticipated with the then best available science. So the concern here is obviously how is all this going to be evaluated in a manner that would actually allow some portion of the state to have a new landfill, and we just can't identify that at this time. So that's why we are opposed to this legislation. Happy to take any questions. I know you're on a time limit here.
I have questions. Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Wimsett, could you come back up? Is he still in here or did he leave? Senator Waters would like a
quick question. What? Thank you, Mike. Yes. Just because of what was said earlier about the process on the rulemaking, would you consider the rules that the DES developed to be science-based?
I do.
Thank you.
Mike, I apologize. I skipped over your. Are you Mike? Come on in. You got. No. You're fine. Come on up. I thought you were marked off here. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Wimsett.
Mr. Chair, I signed up as well. Tom's probably on there too. I'll be very brief.
Yeah, you didn't sign up to speak.
I said no.
You said nothing.
Oh, well, I would like to if that
All right.
Yeah, I'll give you time there. Again, my name is Michael Wright. I'm from Littleton. I'm here in support of this bill. Just a couple of points that I wanted to provide, again, some color, based upon some of the prior testimonies. As Director Wimsett mentioned, that 40% of the state of New Hampshire may be available to actually site a new landfill. So a new landfill would comprise of about 500 acres. So there are 6 million acres in New Hampshire. 40% of that is 2.4 million acres. And that means 0.02% of the available land would be what is required here. Or another way of looking at it, there may be potentially 4,800 sites that could potentially be for this new landfill. The other point that I wanted to talk about is in reference to the average. We talked a little bit about when it comes down to taking the average connectivity issues here within a property to be able to determine whether it's suitable. Now, there is, and this goes from back in 1984, when they were actually citing the landfill up in Bethlehem. The consultant at that time, or the responsible engineer, he said about conductivity is that experience has shown that groundwater flow is preferential towards the coarser, more permeable sediments. That just makes sense. Therefore, any calculations towards future potential impacts of a landfill should use the more higher estimate of the hydraulic conductivity, not the average. When you take a look at water, when it flows, it's going to go and flow to the easiest location that's out there. So I think that's it on my side, and I'll let Tom come on up unless you have questions.
So we're going to ask any questions from the committee. Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Apologize for skipping over to you.
No problem.
I thought it was marked off. Tom?
Yep, my fault, Mr. Chair.
That's all right. You gotta.
Apologize. We'll be.
I saw you nodding and all that, but you didn't.
My bad.
That's all right.
Nice to see you again. Nice to see you, Senator Pearl, Senator Waters, Senator Rosenwald, and Senator McConkey. For the record here, my name is Tom Tower. I am a resident of Whitefield, New Hampshire, and I also serve as the Vice President of North Country Alliance for Balanced Change. Senate Bill 227, not unique. People have talked about it already. Little bit of history, right? Sponsored by a bipartisan group of both House members and Senate members back a few years ago. And then ultimately went through both chambers, overwhelmingly in the House, passes through the Senate to the governor's desk. Governor vetoes it, but it didn't end there, because I think it's really important to mention that when this bill went through the process, there was only one bill in the state of New Hampshire, one veto that was overridden by the House of Representatives, and that was the then 1454, which is a bill very similar to this. Why do I bring that up? Is because it had overwhelming support by the legislature, by the people of the Granite State. So it was a good bill. And why was it a good bill? And why is this a good bill? Because it addressed, at the time, a 200-foot arbitrary setback. This bill addresses what is now a 500-foot arbitrary setback, right? Why is it necessary? I'm not going to get into hydrogeology, right? I'm going to get into common sense. It's necessary because whether or not you have a double liner, a triple liner, or a quadruple liner, stuff happens. Stuff happens. My colleague mentioned that a few years ago, 154,000 gallons of leachate spilled. Had nothing to do with the bucket. Had nothing to do with that high-tech technology that's going to block everything from leaching into the environment. This happened where a landfill is under an operation. It was off-site of that particular bucket that contains that very toxic leachate, and that 154,000 gallons did spill. I passed around some reference material, which I hope will clear some things up for you, Mr. Chair, and the other members of the committee. And one other example I want to bring up. It was just last year, right? In this particular case, leachate is pumped off the liner where it travels through pipes and onto a storage tank before getting trucked off to a facility to be treated. From the second half of 2021 to the first half of 2023, this particular landfill pumped out 2.8 million gallons of leachate. That skyrocketed from the second half of 2023 to the beginning of 2024 to 5.2 million gallons. And landfills, by law, by DES rule, are restricted to having no more than 12 inches of leachate contained in the bottom of that landfill basin at any one time. On hundreds of occasions between July of 2023 and June of 2024, this facility failed to keep to that required level. In one instance, that level was 116 inches or more than 10 times higher, call it 10 feet of leachate, 10 feet. So my point is, stuff does happen. The point is, we need to identify, we need to stop, and we need to have time to remediate to prevent a potential catastrophic situation or a potential Superfund site from occurring. And as the old adage says, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I'll leave you with this. Our governor recently said our natural beauty as a state is both one of our points of pride, but more important than that, she said, it's the bedrock of our unique quality of life here in New Hampshire. To me, it's pretty much common sense to say that our North Country, our Lakes region, our beautiful open spaces shouldn't be scarred by poorly envisioned projects that detract from our quality of life. What SB 227 does is ensure that projects are not poorly envisioned because it creates a buffer that is necessary to ensure that our environment, our water bodies are safe. And I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you for being brief and to the point. We really appreciate it. Are there questions from the committee?
Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you very much. 2 minutes to spare, all right. With that, we're going to close the hearing. Before we get kicked out of here. Finance comes in here next.
And 3 of us will be back here again this afternoon.
Yeah. They kicked me out early. They kicked me out at 12 o'clock. Yeah, I listened to them. I do as I'm told. Yes.
So on 236, you have on the energy programs.
Mm-hmm.